Welcome to the Property Regeneration Podcast. In this podcast, we discuss innovative products and services that meet either local, social, technological, environmental, political, and legal needs within the construction industry or property market. Introducing your host, a property developer and investor, Rachel Gross.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gross. Welcome to part 1 of the discussion on e-waste and user. You can listen to part 2 of this discussion in 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure how you want to kind of get started. I guess it will be edited now that I've just turned it on.
Yeah, just turn it on and edit it as we go. That's probably the best thing.
Yeah.
Because what we spoke about on the phone was this sort of idea that what I've been involved in since 2005 might be a bookend to what you're doing as the podcast, because as we said on the phone, so I, myself and my wife, we bought a 40-acre wood in Wales, and we had 23,600 deciduous saplings planted, and then we had another 2,500-3,000 planted on top of that. And we got permission from the local council, what's called a determination order, to put an agricultural building in the wood. And we thought, and because many years ago, I used to sit on the government's Green Economy Council when it was the coalition government, and I was the representative, one of the representatives from the IT industry into that council, and we had the job of reviewing the sector strategies on sustainability. And I was also involved when I worked for IBM in what they call the Smarter Planet strategy. So this is all about how we could green the whole thing about the IT landscape. And we did various pieces of work with DEFRA and DEC and what have you. But anyway, so that I've sort of got this sort of slight sustainability bent in me, built into me. And so when we bought the wood, we thought, right, here we go. 2005, we can build a sustainable lodge for woodland workers. And so you start off with these sort of grand ideas, don't you? And then you start to do the research and you start to look at various materials and you think, this is not very sustainable, is it? There's a huge amounts of fossil fuels which are involved in even in the basics. So even when you're thinking about what base structure you're going to use, then you sort of naturally, because it's it has to be of an agricultural strength, you start thinking about concrete. Oh my word, what this is?
Exactly.
This is not sustainable at all. And then you start to think about the core of the building itself. Yes, you can use timber and various other things, but actually you start to lean towards steel, and then you look at what's making a steel. You go, well, that's not very sustainable either. And so you get to that point where you sort of think, okay, so the core construction, I can't be that sustainable. I've got to sort of park some of my principles here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be completely sustainable when I go off grid. And so you sort of, you get on and you do all the concrete base work and what have you. And as much of the infilling as possible was using shale which I'd quarried from the wood itself. So in that sense, you're trying to be sustainable, because
I guess it's about finding that balance, isn't it?
Because you don't want to bring the shale in because of all the fossil fuel involved in moving huge amounts of shale. Right, well, we're going to quarry within our own wood, shale it, clean it, use it as a base, put concrete on. That's what. And the steel, you think, okay. And so you put those sort of principles to one side, and so now you've got the fabric of the building, but now you sort of think, like, this is now I can really go off grid. I can really be sustainable. And there's no end of material around which people can go and peruse this. I don't. Have you ever been to the Centre for Alternative Technology near Aberystwyth in Wales?
No.
Oh, well, the Centre for Alternative Technology has been Oh gosh, as a centre, it's operated for years and years and years and years, and they really are far out on some of their ideas. So, for example, how you might use natural fibres, so it might be wool or what have you. But anyway, you're using natural fibres from animals, and you're mixing that with various, mud and various other things to create materials which you can then use for building. I mean, it's just amazing, and there's all sorts of things there on wind turbines and PV panels and small micro water turbines, what have you. So you go to one of these centres and you're suddenly fired up with all this things. I said, right, here we go. And of course, being off grid, your challenge is there's no water supply. There's no electricity. There's no heating, there's no cooling, there's nothing. And so you have to so what we had to do is we had to design a system whereby we could take the rainwater which is coming off the roof, and then we went through all the
purification,
all the different ways in which you can purify water. And we ended up with these paper water filters as a first stage. So that basically cleans out a lot of the grit, as it were, which comes off from the sky and off the roof and down through the downpipes into the collection tanks. So you've got to get rid of the coarse pieces. And then what you want to do is you want to get the water to the point where you can actually use it. So you need a UV filter, which is brilliant. So a UV filter will kill 99.999 of all pathogens and what have you. So that's great. But now you got the problem. How do I power the UV tube? So you've got part way along the way in being sustainable with your water supply, because you're taking it from the heavens and you're capturing it and you clean it. But you need now some bit of technology, power technologies. Now I know there are sort of carbon filters which are commercially available, but for the amount of water which you would need for the people and all the rest of it, carbon filters, so you really got to be able to have a small pump system. And of course, the pump requires electricity as well. And so you're back to sort of, well, how do I generate electricity? How can I generate it in a sustainable way? Because the cheat is, I just ring up the local power company, which was Swalec. They quoted me something in the order of about £40,000 to put electricity in the wood. Yes, you can stipulate that it's from green, sustainable resources, but we thought, no, we were really going to try and be truly off-grid. Like the television programmes. And so in the end, because we've got streams running through the wood, we looked at the idea of doing small micro water turbines, so hydro schemes and what have you. But the complexity for a small system, it was, and the cost of it was just, we just thought, no, this is just not going to work.
Around what ballpark would you?
You were looking at over £15,000 to £20,000 to put in a small hydro scheme. Yeah, because there's various, you've got to create various levels, you've got to maintain those various levels. It's also the amount of cabling which is required to actually move the voltage from downstream up to where you are. And that's not very sustainable either when you start talking about large amounts of copper cabling around and relay stations. So we threw that idea away. And then so we settled on a balance of wind turbine and PV panel. The idea being is that even though we're overlooking the coast, Cardigan Bay in Wales, and it can be very windy, it can also be very wet as you're facing the Atlantic. You've got to have that balance between the two, because sometimes the sun doesn't shine and sometimes the wind doesn't blow, so you've got to. But then of course that in itself isn't truly sustainable, because as you know full well, at some point you've got to be able to store that energy.
That's right.
And batteries are just in no way, shape or form, not only they're pricey, but they're not sustainable. You think about of all the fossil fuels and what have you, and you're talking about a large bank of leisure batteries as well, because they're the safest type of battery really to use that environment. And you want to store hundreds and hundreds of amp hours, and then the reason why you need to store those hundreds and hundreds of amp hours is because you'll be using appliances in the context of managing the wood that require a huge power draw, so you have to have an inverter. Again, that's not a particularly sustainable way of doing things, but you have to do it. So we ended up with, I would describe as not a particularly sustainably built lodge for woodland management, a sort of a sustainable way of creating energy and using that energy to provide lighting, to sterilise the water, and to provide a degree of comfort when you have to protect yourself from the elements and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not that sustainable of the way in which you store that energy. So it's and we started this back in 2005, and we now have a working lodge, which is now being used as a base for what we call the Internet of Trees program. So we're now using technology to monitor the health of trees and to monitor the health of the woodland. Again, that's not particularly sustainable, but it does provide foresters with the opportunity to have a more informed view of where there may be problems within the wood, which they can then go and do further eye-based visual investigations of.
Okay. Can you explain to our listeners in more detail what you mean by the analysis of the wood?
Oh, okay. So one of the problems many of the listeners will be aware of is diseases such as ash dieback. So there's a number of pathogens. Well, there's a number of diseases which are now causing the Forestry Commission, the Royal Forestry Society, the Small Woods Association, but there's a number of bodies that oversee our woodlands and forests across the UK, and they work in conjunction with DEFRA, and they are very concerned about the health of our woodlands. Now, as you can imagine, woodlands you could have a small wooded area, quarter of an acre, half an acre, but also you could have wooded areas which are tens, hundreds of acres, huge areas. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide foresters using the Internet of Things a more affordable way to be able to monitor the health of the woodland.
Yeah.
So it's monitoring, for example, it could be something simple like how much rain is falling on it, or how much light is falling on it, or what the balance of the soil properties are. It might be, for example, how much humidity is that area of woodland being subjected to. It might also be, what you can do is you can actually monitor the flow of the sap as it actually rises and falls in the trunk of the tree. And there are many other quantitative indicators which can be used by foresters to just determine whether that tree or that area of the woodland is under stress. And so if we can provide them with tools which enable them to have a more informed view, it means that they can target their energies on particular areas. So the other thing which we're looking at is using drones. So I know they've not recently had a wonderful press, but you can now buy quite advanced drones which provide you with very good high definition quality photography and videos of the wood, and you can fly them quite close to the canopy. So using artificial intelligence, so using inference engines on these databases, you can actually teach the inference engine to identify areas of woodland which might need further investigation because they're under stress or what have you, or no, actually they seem to be in a healthy state. So again, this is providing a cost-effective means whereby we can rapidly help foresters in determining whether areas of woodland need some further attendance to or not. And again, what this data will enable is, for the bodies like DEFRA, it will give them a much more finer grained view of the state of the woodlands across the British Isles. So the thing about the lodge which we built, in the wood, is that provides a base for foresters and for citizen scientists to be able to then go on and do further experiments. But all the time we're sort of thinking about how sustainable can we make this, and what lessons have we learnt, which actually we can then share with others. So we're already learning lessons from the Internet of Trees project, which we're now beginning to share through the Small Woods Association. It's
very interesting. Yeah. Another thing we discussed earlier, prior to this meeting, is something about artificial intelligence in learning the engine of various trees.
Yeah.
Would you be able to expand?
Well, just to put it simply,
that's the big hype right now, artificial intelligence.
Oh, I know. It's a huge thing. Thinking of it, the best way to the way in which we think of it is just simply as a learning engine. So what you can actually do, I think of it more of augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, because to me, artificial intelligence infers that there's a consciousness. And we're not talking about conscious systems. What we're talking about is being able to take a photograph of something, such as it might be the crown of a tree, the canopy of the tree, or what have you. And actually, you can then teach the algorithm that is a good image or that is a bad image. So the algorithm now knows that's good, that's bad. And what you're doing is the more photographs which you take, the more images which you teach it in terms of good and bad, it can then move to a point where when you present it with an image, it can then infer, which is where the inference engine comes in, it can then infer to a reasonable degree of assuredness that that's good or that's bad. So the bigger the base which you make it, the more confident the algorithm can be in actually offering you a view as to whether that's good or that's bad. Now, this is not new. Believe you me, this is not new. I remember a couple of years ago, I was in Sri Lanka and I visited a tea plantation, and they had a similar system for looking at tea leaves as they came along a conveyor belt. And this system was decades old. And all this system did is it could look at a tea leaf and actually determine that's good, or that's not so good, or that's bad. And then it would shoot off that sort of portion of tea leaves along the conveyor belt. So this technique is not new. I don't want any of the listeners to think that this is new. It's not. The difference is that this type of technology now is much more affordable than it used to be. So, you're talking about the drones that can take high definition photographs that are £1,000. You're not talking about having to use satellite imagery or Cessna aircraft flying overhead. You're talking about affordable technology. You're talking about inference engines that once they're set up, that they cost pennies to run.
Thanks for listening to the Property Regeneration Podcast. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram and Pinterest, and contact us on contact@propertyregeneration.co.uk for more content and to have your questions answered. Until next time, adopt innovations to accommodate the growing population.